from the Occupational Health Center, talking about building a culture of psychological safety. So he's my closer, not to put pressure on you, Geoffrey. So I'll just read his bio. Is an occupational health nurse with a background in cross-cultural health, community development, and organizational change management. He has a master's degree in public health and has extensive international experience delivering healthcare services in a diverse community settings. Geoffrey leads the Occupational Health Center's strategic initiative on workplace psychological health and safety. He specializes in promoting positive workplace mental health through joint worker and management training on how to identify and control on-the-job psychosocial hazards. So please welcome Mr. Geoffrey Thompson.
Hi, everybody. Hopefully I'm coming through. Just had one little technical glitch here. I hope my split screen didn't cause any problems. Are you guys seeing the full PowerPoint?
Not yet, Geoffrey, no.
No, okay. Do you need to share my screen?
Yes, please.
Okay, hold on. Sorry about that. Zoom actually quit on me all of a sudden. I don't know why that happens.
Time pressure, time pressure.
There we go. Okay, how's that?
Excellent.
Better? Okay. So moving on. Hi, everyone. So my name is Geoffrey Thompson. I'm the occupational health nurse here at the OHC. And my background is in public health, and I kind of fell into occupational health and safety about 5 years ago when I took this job. And those of you who've worked with me before know that I'm a little bit of a one-trick pony these days when it comes to workplace psychological health and safety. That's been a big focus in my line of work. So I've been at it for almost 6 years, and it's been quite a journey. And I'm excited to say that the OHC has been at the forefront of this particular issue in Manitoba. And I've had a chance to sit on some committees and some steering decision-making sorts of places. And so my presentation is going to be kind of, in one sense, capping off what this morning has been around where psychological safety particularly intersects with MSI injuries. We're going to be going really, really far upstream here. And I really do think that that is what psychological safety represents, is at least from my biased point of view, is kind of the core issue. So we have some polling questions here. So I just have to make sure that my buttons are working. Tiffany is going to be operating this for me, but for those of you who are on the recording, we also have the question here. It's a true and false. Psychological safety is a group phenomenon grounded in the here and now, whereas trust occurs between individuals involving some future moment in time. So please indicate whether you think that is true or false. We'll see what happens here. I think, Tiffany, you're going to have all of the results. I don't know that I'm co-hosting at the moment. Okay, we usually cut it off about 80%. Are we there? You just have to share it now. Oh, okay. Well, I guess that disappeared. Sorry about that. I'm not sure how you all responded. Oh, here we go. 60% said true, 40% said false. Okay, so the actual answer is true. What's different about psychological safety versus other ideas like trust or faith or hope or some of these certainly psychological feelings and attitudes is psychological safety is a group dynamic, because safety, of course, is about groups, or it's about the environment. It's about workplaces in this sense. And it is about the here and now. So you can be psychologically safe in one moment or not the next moment. And trust is a bit more, it's really formative, it's really deep, and it's almost easier to have trusting relationships between individual people versus trust in your organization. So it's all interrelated, but there is a distinction, and there's also a distinction from psychological health, which is like mental health. So during Theo's presentation, she was very much focused on that level, thinking about your mental health, stress reduction, and those sorts of things, self-care. Psychological safety is different because it recognizes a lot more so the external factors that affect really your physical and your mental health. So we've been hearing a lot about that today, right? We've talked about these psychosocial factors. But I want to drill down even more focused and just talk about the safety piece. So that's what I'm going to talk about in the next 25 minutes or so. Okay, so moving on. So knowledge is power. We haven't talked too much today about reporting or about incidents or about the need to have the data. Okay, so really good safety programs require accurate data. And so in a psychologically unsafe work environment, people aren't going to be willing to share what's really on their mind, or what are the concerns, what are the near misses, what are the things that could have happened but didn't. Those are things that a well-run organization or a company would want to know about, right? And so because you don't want to make assumptions, you don't want to just assume that, well, we dodged that bullet this time. It very rarely happens. I mean, I think about what happened in Texas, right? I mean, that's just horrible. The power outage, the grid broke down. Nobody thought that, okay, once in a couple decades, you might actually get freezing temperatures, but then millions of people lose their power. So making assumptions is not the way to go, which means when you think about this from a practical standpoint, and I hope really if you sat down with an employer, they would agree with you on most of these points, right? That getting a diversity of perspectives is really important because people work in all sorts of different levels and places within a workplace. And so everyone's employed, hopefully, and you want to know that what they're doing is safe and that they're doing it correctly. And so getting all of that information from them, preferably directly, is the way to go. And another thing in the reading and some of the research I've been doing for this presentation and others is that one of the symptoms is actually, if you notice workarounds, if you notice situations where people kind of bend things or cut corners in the sense of, well, I need to borrow maybe some linens from that cart so that I can stock what I'm doing here. It might help me in that moment to actually deal with whatever problem I'm presented with, but then that leaves a loose dangling thread for someone else to try and manage. And so what does that do to interpersonal kind of experiences? So it is kind of an improvement quality question too. I like this term, a VUCA world, especially now with COVID, right? Volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous, right? So if you don't know exactly what you're supposed to do in your role, that is one of those psychosocial factors, right? Is unclear expectations. And we live in a very complex knowledge-based society now. A lot of work is knowledge and creative driven. And unless you have clear leadership on how to kind of navigate through this, you're going to end up with people feeling very much out on a limb. And I think right now, with kind of our remote work situations, we've talked about that a little bit today. You don't want folks feeling like they're mired and left out there on that limb. And finally, ignorance is never a good business strategy. So this is kind of like my bottom line slide. I don't like to spend tons of time here because I do believe that there's a higher moral imperative here for employers to look at mental health, to look at psychological health, and to prioritize that on that fact alone. That is one of those three stools or three legs of the stool with regard to making your case for putting psychological health and safety into your system. But honestly, if you look at the safety piece, if you look at getting good data and qualitative or high quality data to make good improvement decisions on how to improve your product line or whatever service you provide, then having an psychologically unsafe work environment is really very much risky. So, and there's other symptoms, right? There's other things that happen. I use this slide quite a bit. These are signs of psychologically unsafe work, and they could be buried in other pieces of data that might be in HR, database. They might be in a health and safety database. If you're a large organization, sometimes you can't tell where everything is, and you put the pieces together and you start realizing, gosh, there's something going on here. You have high turnover. You don't know why people aren't sticking around. Well, it could be in part because they don't feel safe raising their concerns, feeling like they can express themselves and really come to work as a whole person. And of course, injury rates will go up. So this is higher level than just MSI. And I'm really glad that we've decided to make psychosocial issues kind of today's focus for RSI Day, because if you don't have that kind of safety, you're not going to get reality. You're not going to get the data that you need. So each one of us presenters have had some version of this, these 13 psychosocial factors. When I've done more recent research around psychological safety specifically, it is quite amazing to me how even more interwebbed and interconnected they are. So at first I was like, okay, well, this one's connected to that one and this one. And in the past, I've talked about how psychological protection, which the way I think of that is also around psychological safety, is feeling confident and able to speak your mind and to feel like you can take that interpersonal risk, because that will save you not just mentally, but also physically if the circumstances warrant certainly some critical information about a potential disaster. So I do think about the physical and the psychological as like two binary stars that rotate around each other. But when you think about it, I think by the end of my little talk here, you'll see how much more, and I've just highlighted a few of these. So I think if we focus a bit more on the safety piece, and I'll get into some more specifics, we'll find that there's a lot of positive enabling feedback that happens on all of these other factors. I think of them like gears in a car, where you want them to be going forward and not backwards. And so if you could only pick one or two gears and really drill down on those, and John talked about that, right? When you do your stress assess, when you look at your assessments and your results, what do you focus on? And in my opinion, depending on the workplace, depending on the type of work, if you're having challenges getting accurate information from folks as to what's really going on, then think about psych safety a little more intently. And I have some strategies on how to do that. So quickly, I want to talk about the reality of how we're human beings are irrational in one sense, but we're also very rational when you think about us as social creatures, which of course we are. And nobody wants to look stupid. Nobody wants to look like they don't know what they're doing. And so there's always, no matter what, we go through life and there's going to be this threshold, this risk level, tolerance level that we're either comfortable with or not comfortable with, saying what really is on your mind and what's going on. And depending on where you work, if that's very low, then things get missed, right? So we want to lower that bar. We want people to feel like they can actually express themselves and to do it safely, right? So creating safe spaces to do that. They talk about what's called discounting the future, which is this little trick in our brains where we're so nervous about maybe saying something that might get misunderstood. We keep it to ourselves because we think it's such an issue in that moment. We discount the future. We think, oh, I'm not worried about long-term patterns or what this person's going to say to me next week. I'm worried how they're going to blow up in my face right now. And so it's very much kind of a fight or flight kind of way of thinking. But we need to break through that. We need to think a bit more relationally and a bit more intentionally about kind of the objective aspect of, okay, if I have a patient here and I have an idea as a nurse to actually provide some other sort of treatment that maybe the physician or someone else in the team missed, do I feel psychologically safe to actually express that? Or am I worried because he or she blew up at the other nurse last week that I'm not going to say anything. So that's the problem. That's what we need to start breaking down. And it works with framing. So framing is going into work and working in a culture that has certain expectations and certain ideas around whose role is what, okay? And I'll get more into that in a minute. And these are cognitive biases, right? About the hierarchy, about if I'm the boss, I'm in charge, you've got to listen to me. And so unfortunately, in positions of power and decision-making, if you're not more what we call consciously aware of kind of what you think you see, right? If you're in a large organization and you're at the very top and you only dig down deep enough to go 1 or 2 levels down to see what's really going on the factory floor, that's going to be your realism. That's going to be as far as you go. So we tend to have this like bias towards what I see and experience in my little bubble is my reality. And that's the problem with framing, is it narrows that bubble and makes it impossible for us to be curious and interested about what others might have to contribute, right? And so that's very much a cultural question, but it's also leadership style and feeling, how do you value input in your workplace? And so there's really a lot of good research and thinking about this now. Psychological safety has been around, I think they first coined it in the 1960s. And then in the 90s and early 2000s, it became more of an issue in the management literature. And what I found interesting, when you look at the CSA standard for Canada and you look at some of the other stuff I've been reading, like everything kind of tunnels in different directions, but then we're like meeting here in the middle. And it's a matter of respect. But just remember, it's not just civility and respect. It's like, what does that look like? How is that framed in your workplace? How is the boss thought of? Are they all powerful? Do they have all the answers? And are you just a peon? Are you just a piece of a machine that doesn't really think of you as a person, really? And so we need to think about reframing. And that is where a lot of leadership has to happen. Unfortunately, with this talk, you'll probably think, what do I do? I'm not a leader. I have a little bit about that at the end. It really is a lot of leadership on this one. So if we talk about getting commitment from your agency, from your company around workplace psychological health and safety, if you can get that commitment and help with some of that conscious reframing, your health and safety committee could help nudge in that direction. But you want the folks who make decisions to make good decisions for their interest and in the interest of everyone else in your workplace, so that they're not left with an inaccurate view of reality. So if you can kind of take them down that path gently, you might be surprised. So once again, that's kind of selling a bottom line case to them, but with the very positive benefits of improved mental health, improved engagement, improved resiliency. There's a lot of other very positive things that come out of that kind of environment. A lot of research has been done in particularly safety sensitive jobs. So aviation, for example. In the early 80s, there were more than a few catastrophic accidents on runways where co-pilots and pilots weren't communicating. The co-pilot knew maybe there was something else down the runway, or they had a suspicion, they had a concern, maybe they reinterpreted something from the tower a little bit differently. And those horrible accidents happened when they didn't feel psychologically safe to speak up and say something to the pilot, as like, hey, do you know this might happen? Or did you hear, so they've created new training now that every pilot, at least in the States, and I suspect it's probably carried over to fairly well global at this point, as far as crew response management is what it's called. So how do you feel confident and secure enough in your knowledge to speak up? So I find that interesting, that it takes, unfortunately, those sorts of crises and disasters to get people to think that good communication is just absolutely critical. And that's at the core of psychological safety. So here's our second and last question. If you make a mistake on your team or in your working unit, is it often held against you? So go with your gut. Which way does it mostly swing? And once again, remember, this is anonymous, so we don't know who you are or where you work. And I'll tell you, this is one of many types of questions that are research validated, that are used to measure, at least somewhat qualitatively, what psychological safety is like in a given workplace. So, all right, we've got 58% coming in. We'll wait just another couple seconds here. All right. Okay, so I'm gonna go ahead and wrap that up, Tiffany. 61% of you said no, and 39% of you said yes. Okay, well, the majority said no. And that is good. I mean, that's where we want to head. We want to head towards a no blame culture, right? And that is at the heart also of what psychological safety means, is that we don't stick people out on first as, you lazy son of a gun, or there's some other moral or behavioral issue that puts them on the defensive. Instead of going there first, right? Let's think about the system. Let's think about the context. Let's think about circumstances that might have led to this, unusual or not common, right? I mean, if there's a common thing, and there is such a thing as negligence, don't get me wrong. And I hope you don't think that just because we're psychologically safe doesn't mean we let people off the hook. Okay. There is a need for discipline. There is a need for transparency and clarity. But we don't, we take kind of more of a generous interpretation approach when it comes to certainly a first time failure or something of that nature. So how you frame failure in your workplace is actually really, really important. And if I had more time, we could get into, the typology of failures and what does that look like, and how can you kind of reinterpret and look at it from a learning standpoint rather than, oh my gosh, this is horrible, and people get, fired or mangled in some other way. Okay. Moving on here. So the thinking around this, and I there's one particular research, I had to give a lot of credit to this person, and people at my work probably, like, I've waxed eloquently about this book. It's one of the best books I've read in quite a while, actually. It's called The Fearless Organization, Creating Psychological Safety in the Workplace for Learning, Innovation, and Growth. And what I think is a little bit different about this approach, so this researcher, she's from the Harvard School of Business. She used to work on healthcare teams in the States, really interested in why some healthcare teams had better patient outcomes than others. Like, what were the factors that led to those positive outcomes? And then, of course, the flip of that would be the negative outcomes. And just like I said earlier about kind of that nursing physician dynamic, for example, it was about psychological safety. So they've been able to, Dr. Edmondson and others have been able to tease out certain characteristics that describe the best circumstances where teams can operate the most psychologically safe. And so her book is full of all kinds of case studies. I'll cover a couple quickly today. But she's narrowed it down. Like, if you're really looking for like a step-by-step kind of approach on how to do this, it's all in there. And it's about 250 pages. It's worth it. I'm telling you, if you've got any spare money for that kind of thing, I'd pick it up. So you start with setting the stage, right? That's actually where that framing piece is really, really important. Okay. And that's where leadership can really shine. And if you're having issues with demotivation and people not feeling value, not feeling, so a lot of that is direct communication from leadership on reminding people, why are we here? What is the mission? What are the values of my workplace, my organization? And so there's some good examples of that. And then next, big surprise, inviting participation and actually searching for voice or voices in a workplace. And there's certain techniques and things you can do that were even new to me, that were research-based, that I really think are worth looking at. And then finally, responding productively. And one of those key ideas is to express gratitude. We heard about that earlier, right? And the positive things that it does for you personally, right? As far as your own physiology. But what that does actually is it promotes psychological safety, because people see that brings value, brings dignity, brings a sense of ownership for the work. And so you can't help but have a more productive output if you can encourage more of that in your workplace. So one case example that I really liked in this book, and you're thinking, oh, a mining company, my goodness, bad histories of environmental damage and human rights violations, and surely, I mean, this is a massive, Anglo American's a huge mining company based in South Africa, but they have offices all over the world. I think even in Canada. And this woman on the far right here, of course I'm blanking on her name. I don't have my notes. Where did she go? Here we go. Sorry about that. Cynthia Carroll. There we go. Cynthia Carroll. She was elected to that CEO position in 2007. And she came in and she was appalled at the number of fatalities in some of the mines. And the old guard of the mining company were just like, well, this is this par for the course. People are going to die. This is hard work. It's dangerous work, and we cannot have zero tolerance for death. I mean, injuries for sure. There are going to be injuries, but death, well, tough luck. And the framing at that place, and I'm sure it depends on the particular mine. Every place is a little different. Is this idea that it's the workers' fault? They cut corners. They had workarounds that they maybe shouldn't have done, and so it kind of put leadership, or they're off the hook. Management's off the hook. And so what she did is she came in and said, no, that's not cool. We're gonna strive for this. So she actually shut down a couple mines to make the point that bottom line is not just about our income and our inputs or outputs that way, but it's also about kind of what's going on at the worker level. So I thought that's actually really neat. Now she's not the CEO anymore. There's other people who've taken the mantle, but I kind of poked around their website and did some other research. And, from a social responsibility standpoint, this company did score 80 out of 100. So I haven't looked at any labor metrics as far as how they score on that. I think that's probably part of this thing around social responsibility. But anyway, so I think she'd made her mark on this company. And so as I finish up the rest of the slides, I've only got 17 slides altogether. I'll come back and explain a little bit kind of some of the approaches that they used. Once again, it's a large company, but I thought it was interesting how they brought some of it down to earth, and even in cross-cultural settings, some interesting things there. So I'm just going to go through this quickly. I'm dealing with two screens here. Here we go. So like I said, setting the stage, as I mentioned earlier, is really redefining the purpose. And you do that with data, for sure. It's also about charisma and persuasion and just good old-fashioned candor and being genuine. And if you have a leader in charge, Cynthia Carroll came in and she turned, like, women weren't even allowed into the mines. Like, that's how really intense this was. And she came in and said, I'm going to visit the mines. I'm going to ask what's going on, and we're going to get to the bottom of this. And so, and she cultivated that at her middle and upper management, and then they came down, or she went in person and met with groups. And the other thing they did, moving on, so seeing how that might motivate effort and certainly turn some heads. The other piece to that around inviting participation is doing things that show that you care, right? And that's where this situational humility comes into play. And you don't want to come across as I'm the boss who has all the answers all the time, and I'm going to ask you questions, but I'm going to just, they're just rhetorical. I really know what I want, and I really know what the situation is, because this is my frame, the way I look at things. So if that's how you're coming across, then you're not going to get very far with the inviting participation or voice. And what I thought was really interesting about a company even that large is they rented out a stadium. I think it was in Johannesburg, where they brought in, they like shut down that mine, and then they brought in the thousands of workers to sit around, and they used, forgot the name of it, the word in whatever language it was in South Africa, as far as kind of a round table group sitting in circles and brainstorming, discussing without cutting people off or making assumptions and making judgments. And so they used an approach that was culturally appropriate, and they asked the question. So there we go. Here's the question. The question was, how do you make the workplace a more caring and respectful place of employment, rather than what are the incidents, what are the safety hazards, so before they started asking specific questions, they started asking, like, what are ideas we can do to kind of enhance the way we can interact with you and assure you that you can trust us, that we want to hear from you. So those were the questions they were asking first. And so they actually came out with a contract. The workers helped develop a contract, and there was unions involved in this as well. And they started acting on that. So it was a neat example of kind of a very humble approach, being very proactive in how you do your inquiry. And then the piece two is designing those structures. I think what happens, and I'm guilty of this too, because when I started this work, I kind of made assumptions when I go into a workplace and I make recommendations for, okay, how do you implement the CSA standard, for example? It's like, well, you have a health and safety system. We'll just map on what you're already doing with some of these ideas. And on paper, that looks good, right? But what is the health and vitality of your existing system right now? You're not really doing a lot of good by just slapping on some probably added requirements that folks in either whatever level of organization you're at might roll their eyes and be like, oh boy, more metrics, more things to, So I feel like you need to cultivate relationships, explain what, there's a lot more explaining that has to happen before you start thinking about structures. So it's a bit like that cart before the horse. So I'm trying to be more mindful of that now before I come in with a set of criteria or a set of certain approaches, because every workplace is going to be different, and you kind of have to assess. I think now you need to assess that safety piece, psychological safety, to really make sure you've got really good connection lines, good communication lines with people, and that they're in a place to actually change or actually implement change. It's also a change management question. So moving on. So yeah, once again, this is a leadership question. Don't ask what you already know. That's just rude. Be inquisitive, be curious, and don't just go yes and no, right? This is like any good survey, right? If you just have yes, no questions, you're going to be limited. So having opportunities for, if you have a focus group, great. Some other sort of real opportunity for dialogue. And then allowing people to continue in a deeper thread, deeper way of thinking. So finally, like I said, when it comes to responding productively, and I'm just scratching the surface here, guys. I mean, this is half an hour, or hopefully I don't go too far over. I'm almost done. But each one of these steps, there's other things you can do underneath, and there's actually a whole toolkit that Dr. Edmondson and others have developed around sorts of coaching questions you can ask, and feeling confident as a leader, because this can be intimidating. This is not like a switch you just turn on or off, hopefully on, but it's and even if you're like a new CEO or a new person on the scene, you got to take your time to understand what culture exists before you start pushing for change. Otherwise, you will most certainly get a lot of pushback. And like I said here, destigmatizing failure means defining what failure is, what it isn't. Some of the other case examples I was reading, was like, why is Pixar? Why are these movies so great? I love Pixar. Every movie they put out is just fantastic. And so but they're thinking, they actually created a brain think tank that goes around to each production, and they rip it apart. Each new movie idea gets ripped to shreds, but because they have such a positive, creative, proactive culture, they're able to spin it around as a learning opportunity, right? Not as, oh, my ego, I feel too invested in this. So their mantra was, every new movie idea is a horrible idea, or the first script, the first screenplay is awful. Like, you just work from that assumption and then you just build it up from there. So how you look at failure, you use some imagination, you look at it as from an innovation standpoint, then you're off to the races. And so finally, sanctioning clear violations. Some of the other work I've done was around what's called fierce compassion. So if there's a bad fit, if a person is just not playing ball, or you do have folks like that in a workplace, of course, and if they're themselves a source of anxiety and fear, and certainly poor psychological safety, then you need to have the backbone, you need to have the discipline as a leader to deal with that. And people will understand. I think people see that, especially if you've built up, more rapport with your folks on that. It won't come as a huge shock. So, what do you do if you're in the middle? I'm not the boss, so there's certain things you get, you just as we heard earlier, right? I mean, put on your own oxygen mask first. Same with self-care. It's the same with how you behave. It's the same with how you interact with other people. Like, model that behavior, and with any luck, it is contagious. And other research has shown that it is. When you emulate more compassion, when you emulate more of a giving, humble, inquisitive point of view, that other folks, even those who might be a little more on the ego side, even if their motivations are wrong, even if their motivations are, I want to look good, by acting more like a nice person, I say, I'll take whatever I can get on that one. So can you ever have too much psychological safety? That's come up as questions too. Like, what if people just want to share too much at work, or go on and on and on about what they need or what they want? Once again, I don't think you can have too much if you look at it from the strictest sense of feeling safe in that being your whole person perspective. I do think that, yeah, you need to have venues, you need to have some ways of structuring feedback, if that's a better way of putting it. So I think that's a little bit of a red herring. I think if people are overexpressing, then that might be a sign of something else that you might want to unpack. And then, is it just another way of describing whistleblowing? And whistleblowing, of course, is when things have gotten bad enough that somebody has to generally go outside of an organization and be like, hey, I just witnessed this. Can you report on that? Or can you help me? Can we put a lawsuit in there? I mean, that's worst case scenario, in which case whistleblowing is more like a symptom of poor psych safety. So you can't really compare those as certainly similar. And then another thing that Dr. Edmondson talks a bit about is kind of cultural considerations with regard to psychological safety. It's thought of as more like an enabler for all of those other factors, right? All those 13, but then also all the other elements around diversity in the workplace, feeling heard, feeling like you have representation, feeling like there's somebody in positions of power who either look like me or can understand and be empathetic to what I'm going through. Okay, and so there's certainly a lot of HR things to kind of juggle there. So psychological safety is more like kind of the ocean you swim in, but being deliberate about inclusivity, diversity, that's just another boat in that ocean, so to speak. So they dovetail. It's not one or the other, it's all of it. So in summary, not doing too bad here, it's 12:02. Psychological safety is different from psychological health. And I'm like the last one to come to this realization. It's really funny because, I'm a nurse and I have more of a therapeutic kind of problem-based, and my background's also in public health. And so, of course, health is where my brain goes. And I believe in environmental health. I believe in factors, social determinants of health, all these things. But psychological safety, when you truly think of it from the safety standpoint, it is about reporting. It is about sharing. It is about feeling safe enough to express yourself and have confidence. And even if your knowledge is down here and you're really timid, by raising your hand and saying how you're really feeling, you're contributing to a safe environment that could be psychological or physical in nature. So I think in the CSA standard, and in Manitoba, we get hung up about, is it health before safety or safety before health? And I don't go there. I just think the two really have to be together on that piece. So once again, leadership quality and organizational culture are the fundamental principles around here. You're not going to change it overnight. That leadership piece is really important. So if you can use other mechanisms to get that buy-in, get that commitment, use language that's more qualitative improvement, performance improvement, or innovation, like whatever it takes to get your business folks kind of turning their heads on why, especially in this environment, right? I mean, I know hiring is rough right now with the pandemic and all these things going on, but in the end, like people are going to stick around with companies that actually value them as whole human beings. And so, of course, we need more of it to prevent injuries. And, I haven't mentioned MSIs at all, right? I mean, I get the last word, and thanks, Andrew, for that. But it is about preventing all types of injuries. And of course, MSIs, as Jamie said, are one of the top ones in Manitoba as far as reporting. So, but look at all this other great stuff, right? It's like if you allow folks to be their whole selves and to express themselves, resiliency, creativity, innovation, engagement, mental health, all these things get better. Which is why I'm on this bandwagon. I'm going to really be pushing more the psychological safety point of view. So, so I'm challenging you today. So thanks for bearing with us, going just a little bit over here, but go back and take a look at what you're doing and celebrate what you're doing well. I mean, if you're a manager and you're getting great reviews and people love working for you, think about that. Do some self-reflection, and you'd be surprised if you can actually put names to things as to why things are going well. That's great, not only for your own benefit, because then you can articulate that and share that to either other managers and other leaders and say, hey, I've noticed that this works for me, and I give people, it's not just about an open door policy where they can come in whenever they want, but you're actually creating structured ways, reliable ways for people to come and really express themselves. So it is about a system, but it needs to begin with individual people in the sense of emulating and acting on those positive behaviors. So I will say one last thing. We're developing a workshop in April. We've already picked our dates just yesterday. This is hot off the press. April 7th and 8th. These are afternoon sessions. We're experimenting with Zoom and virtual, of course. We're thinking we want to do a one-day course on this topic. So leadership-driven, leadership in the sense that it's more than just you being the very top dog. It's anyone can be a leader. Anyone can be a leader in occupational health and safety, right? And particularly around mental health and psychological safety, because people aren't necessarily tuned into this as an issue. So if you're feeling passionate about this and you want to talk a bit more about kind of tools and techniques and ideas on how to maybe make some of these gradual changes in your safety culture, then this might be a session for you. We might have to cap it at 20 or 25. We want to have breakouts. We want to have polling. We're going to make it as interactive as possible. We'll promote this next week. I think we'll send it out. So get your name in. If it goes over really well, then we'll repeat it. But we thought, I liked this morning's format where we get to take little breaks. So I think if we did 2 afternoons, people can take breaks. It doesn't wipe out their whole day. They're not getting Zoom fatigue quite so badly. So if you're on the mailing list, if you got the notes or the links to come to this today, look out for that next week. So I know we're a little bit over. I can take questions now, Andrew or Tiffany.
Yes, so let me just say thank you, Geoffrey. I had some closing statements, which I'm not going to do, but I have got a plan. I've got some actions that I really want to follow through on today's topic. So for Geoffrey, you're here, so people know how to get a hold of you. Let's open it up to some questions.
There was one question that came in through the chat. So how do you change the political undertones to address these issues?
Ooh, that's a toughie. Political undertones. Oh, context is in the details. I'd love to know more about that. Yeah, to be human is to be political. I think, yeah, and it stems from that kind of the way we're wired socially. Yeah, I'd love to have a conversation with someone. I think it's about it is unfortunately about personality and who's in charge. I think for something of this nature, I mean, my case study was one about a CEO who took that on, right? And so if you don't have that internally, I know we probably have a lot of union folks who plugged in, and that this is, I know, the rock they hit their head against constantly, right? Is how do you get management on board around something like this if the politics are just anti-worker, quite frankly, or anti-responsibility around this issue. So, I mean, that is the holy grail. That is in terms of challenges. So, I think it takes, and you're not gonna like the answer to this question, but it means taking risk yourself as someone kind of in the middle of this quagmire. It is an interpersonal risk for you to be like, I care about this issue and I'm gonna, stick my neck out and promote it as something we need to deal with. It's not easy, and that's why there's power in numbers. And I know we keep coming back to the Health and Safety Committee as this like a panacea of excellence, but it depends on your workplace whether that platform, that venue is actually effective, quite frankly. So I'm sorry I don't have any like boilerplate like magical way of saying that politics are gonna it is, you have to pick your battles. I mean, for me personally, I think this is a battle worth picking, especially when you look at injury rates and you look at certainly issues around COVID and all of that. So I will also put out a plug, and maybe you already did this, Andrew, but I mean, honestly, what the OHC does is we take in requests. So if you want a one-on-one with us remotely at this point about kind of what you're dealing with, and you wouldn't mind some advice, or you don't have time to do research on a particular topic and you want us to do it, that's what we're paid to do, and we're free. So use us, give us a call. We call that request for information. I was joking about being a one-trick pony. I can do other things besides mental health or psychological health and safety. So if it's something else OHS related, I can also help with that. So I'll leave it at that. If anyone wants to have a follow-up on something of a sticky nature like that, of course, everything's confidential. We don't blab about workplaces and people that we interact with, certainly on this type of topic. So.
Great.
Thanks, Geoffrey. And there's also some resources in the chat that if anybody wanted to check those out related to that topic as well, as some other ones. So they're in the chat. There's some links in the chat for that as well that John has put in.
All right, so Tiffany, shall we do the draw?
Sure. There you go. We are going to put the participant numbers according to the registration list on my list too, because there are 2 draws we're going to pay. We have exactly 190 people registered. So we're going to pick 2 numbers. So I'm going to roll the dice here and see what 2 number comes up, and then according to which name will be the winners. There you go. 74 and 105. According on my list, 74 is Alex Andrews from No One Windows.
Oh, No One Windows. Alex. You get a fleece.
105 is, let me see, is Dennis Munoz. I don't know, I pronounced the name correctly, from the government of Manitoba. Denise Munoz, M-U-N-O-Z, last name. So both 2 winners, we will going to send you the emails and to see how we could deliver the 2 beautiful Save Up Manitoba feast jacket to you.
All right. So, and then in the chat, it said we're going to send you a feedback survey. So please fill that out. It's now like 12:15. I'm sure you're hungry. So let's leave it with this. When you go home or get out of your home, go outside and listen for the birds. It's springtime. They're out. I've heard them. It'll relax you a little bit, and maybe it'll put a smile on your face too for the rest of the weekend. So have a great Friday. Thank you everyone for attending, and thanks to Safe Work for hosting with us, and the resources for the fleece and the speaker gifts. Thank you very much. And to Gail and Roland, who didn't really talk much here, but they helped organize it. And Mike and Jennifer, who helped do the chats. Veronica is actually not here today, but she helps. And Jeannie and all the speakers. So thank you very much. Have a great day. You'll be hearing from us again soon. All right. Bye, everyone.